The stolen apple hit the ground with a hollow thud as Temperance Blackwood collapsed to her knees in the dusty street, her emaciated frame too weak to outrun the angry merchant. It was July 1876 in Pahrump, Nevada territory, and she hadn't eaten in 3 days. Thief. The merchant bellowed, his face contorted with rage as he rounded his cart. "Sheriff, we got a thief here." Temperance could barely lift her head, the world spinning around her as the scorching desert sun beat down mercilessly. She had come west with dreams of a new beginning after losing everything in Chicago: her husband, their small bakery, and finally their home to creditors who showed no mercy to a young widow. Now, at 23, she found herself starving in a dusty frontier town, too proud to beg until hunger had driven her to desperation. "What seems to be the problem, Mr. Collins?" A deep voice cut through the gathering crowd. Through her tangled brown hair, Temperance glimpsed dusty boots approaching. She braced herself for rough hands dragging her to jail. "She stole from my cart, caught her red-handed with one of my apples," the merchant spat. The owner of the boots knelt beside her. "Miss, can you stand?" Temperance tried to push herself up, but her arms trembled and gave way. Strong hands caught her before she hit the dirt. "Isaac Kent's the name, madam," he said quietly. "I reckon you're in a bad way." She looked up into clear blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face. The man couldn't have been more than 30, with sandy hair peeking out from beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't wearing a sheriff's badge, just the practical attire of a working man, though the quality of his clothing suggested he wasn't struggling like most. "How much for the apple, Collins?" Isaac asked without taking his eyes off Temperance. "2 cents, but that ain't." Isaac stood and pulled a silver dollar from his pocket, flipping it to the merchant. "That ought to cover it." His attention returned to Temperance. "And your name, miss?" "Temperance," she whispered, her voice raspy from thirst. "Temperance Brewer." "Well, Miss Brewer," Isaac said, gentleness in his voice despite the firmness of his stance, "I believe you need more than just one apple." With surprising ease, he lifted her from the ground. Temperance was too weak to protest, as he carried her away from the murmuring crowd. She felt the curious stares of townsfolk as Isaac strode purposefully down the main street toward a modest building with a sign reading Kent's General Store. "Rufus," Isaac called to a young man arranging canned goods on a shelf. "Mind the store, I'll be back shortly." He carried her through a back door and up a narrow staircase to living quarters above the shop. The room was simply furnished but clean, with a small table, 2 chairs, a wood stove, and a door leading to what she assumed was a bedroom. "Please," she managed, shame burning her cheeks. I don't seek charity." "This isn't charity," Isaac said firmly as he set her down on a chair. "This is basic human decency." He moved to a basin, wetting a cloth before returning to press it gently against her forehead. "When did you last eat properly, Miss Brewer?" The cool cloth against her feverish skin felt like heaven. A week ago, perhaps. I've had scraps since then." Isaac's jaw tightened. He moved to a small pantry, returning with bread, cheese, and dried beef. As he placed the food before her, Temperance's hands shook so badly she could barely hold the bread. "Slowly," he cautioned, pouring her a cup of water. "Your stomach won't take kindly to rushing." Tears sprang to her eyes as she took small bites. Each morsel was exquisite torment, her body desperate for nourishment yet painful as it remembered how to digest. "How long have you been in Pahrump?" Isaac asked, taking the seat across from her. 3 weeks, she answered between careful bites. "My money ran out faster than I expected. I've been looking for work, but not much call for a woman's labor here unless you're willing to work the saloons," Isaac finished for her, his expression darkening. "And I can see you're not that sort." Temperance lowered her eyes. "I tried to find decent work. I can bake so reasonably well. I was hoping the hotel might need help, but they weren't hiring." Isaac studied her thoughtfully. "Where were you staying?" Her silence answered for her. "I see," he said quietly. "Well, you can't keep sleeping rough." "There's a small room behind my store. It's not much, but it's got a proper bed and a lock on the door." "Mr. Kent, I couldn't possibly." "You can work it off," he said matter-of-factly. "My business is growing faster than I can manage alone. Rufus helps with the store, but I've got other ventures that need tending. Can you keep accounts? Read and write?" Temperance nodded, hope fluttering in her chest. "My husband and I ran a bakery in Chicago before he died. I kept all our ledgers." Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, approval, perhaps. Then we have an arrangement, room and board in exchange for honest work, when you're stronger, of course. Why would you help a stranger, a thief? She asked, unable to mask her suspicion. In her experience, men rarely offered assistance without expecting something in return. Isaac's expression remained unreadable for a moment before he sighed. 6 years ago, I came to Nevada with nothing but the clothes on my back and a handful of apple seeds. A stranger gave me work when no one else would, and I swore I'd do the same if I ever had the chance. He stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the dusty street below. Rest here a while. When you're feeling steadier, I'll show you to your room. Temperance watched him, this unexpected savior in a place where she'd found nothing but hardship. Thank you, Mr. Kent. Isaac, he corrected. We're not much for formality in Pahrump. That afternoon marked the beginning of Temperance's new life in the shadow of the Spring Mountains. As promised, Isaac provided her with a small but clean room behind his general store, complete with a narrow bed, washstand, and a chest for her meager belongings. Within days, once her strength began returning, she started working in his store, organizing his chaotic bookkeeping system and helping customers when Rufus was busy with deliveries. The townsfolk regarded her with suspicion at first, the strange woman who'd tried to steal from Colin's produce cart. But Isaac's evident trust in her gradually influenced others, and Temperance found herself slowly accepted into the community. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Isaac appeared at the store just as she was closing up, feeling up to a short ride. He asked, a mysterious smile playing at his lips. A ride? Temperance questioned, brushing flour from her apron. She'd spent the afternoon experimenting with baking bread in the small oven behind the store. There's something I'd like to show you, he explained, offering no further details. It's not far, just at the edge of town. Curiosity piqued, Temperance agreed. Outside, Isaac had hitched a wagon rather than saddle horses. He helped her up onto the seat, his touch brief but courteous, before climbing up beside her and taking the reins. They traveled in companionable silence, the wagon rolling past the last buildings of Pahrump until they reached a stretch of land Temperance hadn't yet seen. As they crested a small rise, she gasped in surprise. Before them stretched several acres of young apple trees, their branches still thin but beginning to spread. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the orchard, making the scene appear almost magical against the harsh desert backdrop. Your apple trees, Temperance whispered, understanding dawning. The seeds you mentioned. Isaac nodded, pride evident in his expression. 500 trees now, with room for twice that number. I've had to bring water in from the creek, but they're hardy stock. First real harvest should come next year. He guided the wagon down a dirt track that cut through the center of the orchard until they reached a modest cabin. It was simple but sturdy looking, with a wide porch and windows that caught the last rays of sunlight. This is where it all started, Isaac said, helping her down from the wagon. I lived here while building the store in town. Now I use it when I'm working the orchard. Temperance walked slowly among the nearest trees, touching their smooth bark reverently. It's remarkable what you've accomplished, to make something grow in such an unforgiving place. That's the beauty of it, Isaac replied, his voice softening. The land only seems unforgiving until you understand what it needs. Give these trees enough water and care and they'll produce fruit sweeter than any you've tasted. He led her to one particular tree, slightly larger than the others. This was my first. From the very first seed I planted, already gave me a handful of apples last season. Is that where the apple came from, the one eye? Temperance trailed off, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. Isaac smiled. No, those came from California. Mine aren't ready yet, but when they are, he paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. When they are, I hope you'll still be in Pahrump to taste them. Something in his tone made Temperance look up sharply. There was an earnestness in his expression that stirred something inside her, something she'd thought had died along with her husband. I don't plan on leaving, she said softly. Not when I've only just found my footing. As they stood in the golden light of sunset, surrounded by the promise of fruit to come, Temperance felt the first tentative blossom of hope take root in her heart. Over the next month, Temperance settled into a routine that brought her more satisfaction than she'd expected to find again. Mornings were spent in the store, organizing inventory and helping customers. Afternoons often found her baking bread and simple pastries that Isaac had begun selling, a small enterprise that had quickly gained popularity among the townspeople. What surprised her most was Isaac himself. Unlike other businessmen she'd known, he seemed genuinely interested in the welfare of the community. He extended credit to families going through hard times, donated supplies to the small schoolhouse, and was quick to offer a meal to any drifter passing through who was willing to work for it. "You're different from most men I've met," Temperance remarked one evening as they sat on the porch behind the store, enjoying the cooler air after a blistering day. Isaac raised an eyebrow. "How so? You seem to care about more than just profit." She gestured toward the store. "I've seen your ledgers. You could charge more for your goods, but you don't." He was quiet for a moment, contemplating her observation. "Money's necessary, but it's not everything. My father was a merchant back in Pennsylvania, ruthless in business. Had the biggest store in town, but not a friend to his name when he died." Isaac's gaze drifted to the distant mountains. "I decided young that wouldn't be my legacy." "Is that why you came west?" A shadow crossed his face. "Partly. There was a war, too." "Saw enough during those years to last a lifetime." Temperance nodded, understanding. Many had fled east after the Civil War, seeking to escape memories too painful to live alongside. "And your orchard?" she asked, sensing his desire to move away from talk of the war. "Why apples?" At this, his expression lightened. "My grandmother had an orchard when I was a boy, spent every summer helping her tend it. There was something peaceful about it, the rhythm of the seasons, watching something grow year after year." He smiled at some private memory. "Plus, everyone needs sweetness in their life, especially out here where everything else is hard edges and survival." The simple honesty of his words touched Temperance deeply. She'd begun to see that beneath Isaac's capable, sometimes stern exterior was a man of profound gentleness, a quality made all the more striking by the harsh environment he'd chosen to make his home. As autumn approached, Isaac began spending more time at the orchard, preparing for winter and planning for the coming spring. He often invited Temperance to join him, teaching her about grafting and pruning while they worked side by side in the lengthening shadows of the afternoon. It was during one such visit in late September that everything changed between them. They'd been working all afternoon, clearing irrigation channels before the first frost could arrive. The physical labor had left Temperance feeling stronger than she had in months, her body no longer the frail shell that had collapsed in the street. As the sun began to set, Isaac suggested they rest on the porch of the cabin before returning to town. "You've put on some healthy weight," he observed as he handed her a cup of coffee. Temperance laughed, surprised by his direct comment but not offended. "Is that your way of telling me I'm getting fat, Mr. Kent?" His ears reddened. "No, I only meant. When you first came, you were so thin it worried me. Now you look." He stumbled over his words. "Healthy, strong, it suits you." "Well, regular meals and honest work will do that," she replied, smiling at his discomfort. In truth, she'd noticed the changes herself, her dresses fitting better, her hair regaining its shine, the hollows in her cheeks filling out. Isaac cleared his throat. "Temperance, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." The seriousness in his tone made her heart quicken unexpectedly. "The bakery items you've been making have been selling better than I anticipated. I was thinking if you're interested, we might expand that side of the business. Perhaps set up a proper bakery counter in the store." It wasn't what she'd expected him to say, though Temperance wasn't sure what she had expected. Relief mingled with a curious disappointment. "That sounds like a fine idea," she said carefully, "but it would require equipment, ingredients." "I'd provide all that," Isaac said quickly. "We'd split the profits, of course, a partnership of sorts." The word partnership hung between them, laden with possibilities neither seemed ready to acknowledge. "I'd like that," Temperance said finally. "It's been a long time since I've felt useful, needed." Isaac's gaze held her steadily. "You are needed, Temperance, more than you know." The weight of his words settled around them like a blanket. For a moment neither spoke, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze and the distant call of a night bird. Isaac broke the silence first, standing abruptly. "It's getting late. We should head back." But as they walked to the wagon, his hand brushed against hers accidentally, perhaps, though Temperance couldn't help wondering if there had been intention behind it. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth spreading through her, awakening feelings she'd believed long buried. As autumn deepened into winter, Pahrump experienced a rare cold snap that brought frost to the valley floor and snow to the surrounding mountains. The orchard required extra attention, with young trees needing protection from the cold. Isaac spent increasingly long days there, sometimes staying overnight in the cabin when the weather turned treacherous. On one such night in early December, Temperance found herself alone in the store, closing up after a busy day. A sudden snowstorm had blown in from the mountains, unusual for the desert region and catching many unprepared. As she was about to lock the door, a figure on horseback emerged from the swirling snow. Isaac, his coat crusted with ice and his face tight with cold. "Isaac," Temperance exclaimed, ushering him inside. "I thought you were staying at the orchard tonight." "Worried about the store with this weather," he managed through chattering teeth. "And you?" She helped him remove his frozen coat and led him to the wood stove in the back room where she'd been preparing to bake the next morning's bread. "You're half frozen," she scolded gently, pushing him onto a stool near the stove. "What were you thinking riding in this? Wasn't this bad when I started?" he defended weakly, holding his hands out to the warmth. Storm came on faster than expected. Temperance poured him a cup of coffee from the pot she kept warm on the stove, adding a generous splash of whiskey from the bottle Isaac kept for medicinal purposes. "Drink this," she ordered. "Then you're going straight upstairs to get warm and dry." Isaac raised an eyebrow at her commanding tone but didn't argue, sipping the spiked coffee gratefully. As color returned to his face, Temperance became uncomfortably aware of their situation. They were alone, the storm howling outside, and she had just essentially ordered him to his bedroom. "I should go to my room," she said quickly. "Let you get some rest." Isaac caught her wrist as she turned to leave. "Temperance, wait." The touch of his fingers against her skin sent a current through her body. She turned back slowly, finding his gaze intense in the dim light of the stove fire. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice rough with more than just cold. "About the future, about the store, the orchard, about us." Temperance's heart hammered in her chest. "Us?" Isaac stood, still holding her wrist gently. "I know it hasn't been long, just a few months. But I feel like I've known you much longer." He paused, searching for words. "When I found you that day, I never expected how quickly you'd become essential to everything I do." "Isaac," she whispered, uncertain what to say. "I'm not asking anything of you," he continued hurriedly. "Just wanted you to know that whatever you decide about staying in Pahrump, I hope it includes staying with me, not just working together, but—" He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear in his eyes. Temperance felt a surge of emotion, fear, hope, and something deeper that had been growing steadily since that first day. "My husband died 2 years ago," she said softly. "I never thought I'd feel anything for anyone again. And now?" Isaac asked, his voice barely audible above the crackling fire and howling wind. Instead of answering with words, Temperance stepped closer, placing her hand on his chest. She could feel his heart beating rapidly beneath her palm. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Isaac lowered his head until his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if both were afraid of shattering the moment. Then Temperance slid her arms around his neck, and Isaac pulled her closer, the kiss deepening with a hunger that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, Temperance rested her forehead against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "I should go," she whispered, not moving. Isaac's arms remained around her. "Stay," he said simply. "Not for anything improper, just stay with me tonight. The storm's too fierce for you to cross to your room anyway." The practical reason was sound, but both knew it wasn't the real one. Still, it gave Temperance the excuse she needed to follow her heart rather than convention. They climbed the stairs to his living quarters together, hands entwined. That night, they simply held each other, talking softly as the storm raged outside, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams of the future until sleep claimed them both. When morning came, bringing clear skies and brilliant sunshine reflecting off fresh snow, Temperance knew with certainty that her life had changed irrevocably. Whatever came next, she and Isaac would face it together. The snowstorm that had brought them together physically marked the beginning of a different kind of closeness between Temperance and Isaac. Though they maintained propriety in public, This was still a small town where gossip traveled faster than stage coaches privately. They began planning a shared future. "I've been thinking about the bakery expansion," Isaac told her one evening in late January as they sat going over ledgers in his quarters. The weather had turned mild again, typical of the desert's winter extremes. "What if we did more than just a counter in the store?" Temperance looked up from her calculations. "What do you mean?" "The empty building next door, the one that used to be Turner's barbershop before he moved to Virginia City. I could purchase it, connect it to the store and make it a proper bakery and cafe." Her eyes widened at the scope of his vision. "That would be a considerable investment." "It would," he agreed. "But with the mining operations expanding north of town and the stage line adding another weekly stop here, Pahrump is growing. People need somewhere to gather to take meals when they're passing through." The idea excited Temperance. While she'd enjoyed working in the general store, baking had always been her true passion. "It would mean hiring help for the store," she mused, thinking practically. "You couldn't manage both. Rufus is ready for more responsibility, and there's young Thomas Wilcox looking for steady work now that his family's moved to town." Isaac reached across the table, taking her hand. "What do you think? Could you see yourself running a bakery again?" The question held layers of meaning. Was she ready to put down roots here, to build something permanent? "I could," she said softly, "with the right partner." Isaac's thumb traced circles on her palm. "I was hoping you'd say that, because I have another proposal to make." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Temperance's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple gold band set with a small, perfect pearl. "It's not a diamond," he said apologetically. "Those are hard to come by out here. But the trader who came through last month had this, and it made me think of you, beautiful, rare, and formed through adversity." Tears pricked at Temperance's eyes. "Isaac." "Temperance Brewer," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his face. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of sharing my name, my business, my orchard, and my life?" The answer formed easily, naturally, as if it had always been waiting to be spoken. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Isaac slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that spoke of all they had yet to share. They were married on the first day of March 1877 in a simple ceremony performed by the circuit preacher who visited Pahrump once a month. The entire town turned out for the event, even Mr. Collins, whose apple cart had inadvertently brought them together. The celebration was held at Isaac's orchard, where the earliest apple blossoms were just beginning to appear, promising future harvests. Tables were set up among the trees, laden with food contributed by neighbors and friends. Temperance had baked a 3-tier cake, decorated with crystallized fruit and the first spring flowers. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the branches of the young orchard, Isaac led Temperance away from the festivities to the special tree, his first, the one that had already borne fruit. "I have a wedding gift for you," he said, producing a small wooden box from his pocket. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a delicate gold locket. When Temperance opened it, she found a tiny, perfect apple blossom preserved inside. "It's beautiful," she breathed, touching the preserved blossom gently. "There's something else," Isaac said, guiding her to look at the cabin. For the first time, she noticed changes, a new addition extending from one side, fresh paint, curtains in the windows that hadn't been there before. "I've been working on it for months," he explained. "I hoped you might want to live here rather than above the store. We'll still need to be in town during the week, but weekends, holidays." "Our home," Temperance whispered, understanding what he was offering. Not just a place to live, but roots something permanent after years of uncertainty. As spring blossomed into summer, the newlyweds threw themselves into expanding their business ventures. The bakery renovation progressed rapidly, with Isaac overseeing construction while Temperance planned menus and equipment purchases. By June, Kent's Bakery and Cafe opened its doors, quickly becoming a popular gathering place for locals and travelers alike. Temperance's bread and pastries developed a reputation that extended beyond Pahrump, with stagecoach passengers sometimes purchasing extra loaves to take with them to Virginia City or Las Vegas. Meanwhile, Isaac continued developing the orchard, adding new varieties of apples and experimenting with other fruit trees that might survive the harsh desert conditions. Their personal life flourished alongside their business success. Weekends were spent at the orchard cabin, which they now called Apple Bough. Those quiet days away from town became precious time for them to simply be together, free from the constant demands of commerce. It was during one such weekend in late August that Temperance finally found the courage to share news she'd been harboring for several weeks. They were sitting on the porch swing Isaac had built, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. The air was heavy with the scent of ripening fruit. The orchard's first substantial harvest was nearly ready. "I visited Dr. Morrison yesterday," Temperance said casually, though her heart was racing. Isaac turned to her, immediately concerned. "Are you unwell?" "You've been tired lately, but I thought it was just the heat and the long hours at the bakery." She smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "Not unwell, just expecting." It took a moment for understanding to dawn on Isaac's face. When it did, his expression transformed into one of such pure joy that Temperance felt tears spring to her eyes. "A baby," he whispered, as if saying it too loudly might make the miracle disappear. "We're going to have a child," Temperance nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Isaac gathered her into his arms so carefully, as though she had suddenly become fragile as spun glass. When he asked against her hair, "February, the doctor thinks, a winter baby." Isaac pulled back to look into her eyes, his own shimmering with unshed tears. "Are you happy about this, Temperance? Truly, happier than I ever thought possible," she assured him. "Are you?" In answer, he kissed her with such tenderness it made her heart ache. "You've given me everything I never knew I wanted," he said when they finally broke apart. "A partner, a home, a future, and now a family." As they sat entwined on the porch, watching darkness settle over their orchard, Temperance marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From starving and desperate to loved and expectant, all because she'd stolen an apple and been caught by the one man in the territory who saw her need rather than her crime. The months of Temperance's pregnancy passed in a blur of activity. The bakery thrived under her direction, even as she gradually reduced her hours as her condition advanced. Isaac insisted on hiring additional help, bringing in a local woman named Martha Gunderson to take over more of the baking responsibilities. "You're working too hard," he chided gently when Temperance protested. "The business won't collapse if you rest occasionally." Though she grumbled about being treated like delicate china, Temperance secretly appreciated his concern. Her first marriage had been loving but fraught with financial worries that had taken a toll on both her and her late husband. This second chance at happiness still sometimes felt dreamlike in its security and abundance. As her body changed, growing round with their child, Isaac's attentiveness only increased. He would often find him watching her with an expression of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe their good fortune. "What are you staring at?" she asked one evening as they prepared for bed in their room above the store. "The most beautiful sight I've ever seen," he answered simply, placing his hand on her swollen belly. As if in response, the baby kicked against his palm, drawing delighted laughter from both parents. Their child was active, especially at night, prompting Isaac to joke that they were raising a nocturnal creature. "Probably takes after you," he teased. "I've seen how early you rise to start the baking." Winter arrived, bringing cold winds and occasional snow flurries to Pahrump. The orchard went dormant, the trees standing like sentinels against the gray sky. Isaac spent this quieter season making improvements to Apple Bough, determined that everything would be perfect for when Temperance and the baby could spend more time there. As February approached, Temperance found herself torn between excitement and apprehension. Her first marriage had remained childless, and while she'd always longed for a family, the actual prospect of motherhood now loomed both wonderful and terrifying. "What if I'm not good at it?" she confessed to Isaac one night as they lay in bed, her discomfort making sleep elusive. Being someone's mother. Isaac propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with tenderness. "You'll be magnificent," he assured her. "You have more love in your heart than anyone I've ever known." But practical matters, nursing, diapers, soothing a crying infant. "We'll learn together," he promised. Besides, half the women in town have already volunteered advice. We'll have no shortage of guidance, wanted or otherwise. His wry humor made her smile despite her fears. Isaac had a way of simplifying problems that had always seemed insurmountable when faced alone. Their son arrived during a rare winter thunderstorm on February 12, 1878. The labor was long and difficult, with the town's midwife, Mrs. Abernathy, finally sending for Dr. Morrison when complications arose. For hours, Isaac paced outside their bedroom door, occasionally hearing Temperance's cries through the thick wood. When Mrs. Abernathy finally emerged, her face was grave. "The baby's turned wrong," she told him quietly. "The doctor's trying to adjust him, but your wife is weakening." Terror gripped Isaac's heart. How many men had he known who lost their wives in childbirth? How many orphan children had he seen growing up in others' homes? "Let me see her," he demanded. "Mr. Kent, it's not proper, damn propriety," Isaac growled, pushing past the startled midwife into the bedroom. The scene inside would haunt him for years. Temperance, pale and sweating, her face contorted in pain as Dr. Morrison worked between her legs, sleeves rolled up and forearms bloodied. "Isaac," Temperance gasped when she saw him, reaching out a trembling hand. He was at her side in an instant, taking her hand and pressing it to his lips. "I'm here, my love, I'm here. The baby will be fine," he assured her with a conviction he didn't feel. "You both will, doctor." Morrison glanced up, about to order Isaac out, then seemingly thought better of it. "If you're staying, make yourself useful. Support her shoulders when the next pain comes. She needs to push with everything she has." What followed was the most harrowing hour of Isaac's life. He held Temperance as she struggled to bring their child into the world, whispering encouragement, wiping her brow, praying as he hadn't since his days on the battlefield. When their son finally emerged, squalling and red-faced, the relief that flooded through Isaac was so profound he found himself weeping openly. Dr. Morrison quickly checked the infant before placing him on Temperance's chest. "You have a fine, healthy boy," the doctor pronounced, his exhausted face breaking into a rare smile. "And a wife made of stronger stuff than most men I know." Temperance looked up at Isaac, her eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and radiant joy. "He looks like you," she whispered, touching the baby's shock of sandy hair. Isaac gazed down at the tiny, perfect face of his son, overcome with emotions too profound for words. This was his legacy, not just the store or the orchard, but this new life created from their love. "What shall we call him?" Temperance asked softly. Isaac had been thinking about this for months, but had kept his thoughts private, waiting for this moment. "What about Thomas, after your father?" Tears spilled from Temperance's eyes. "You remembered." "Of course I did," he murmured, stroking her damp hair. "Thomas Kent, a good, strong name." As he held his wife and newborn son in the quiet aftermath of the storm, Isaac sent a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever twist of fate had placed Temperance in his path that scorching day the previous summer. From the simple act of stealing an apple had grown this abundance of blessings he now cherished. Young Thomas Kent thrived under the devoted care of his parents. From the beginning, he showed himself to be a determined child with his mother's expressive eyes and his father's steady temperament. By the time spring returned to Pahrump, bringing fresh blossoms to the orchard, he had become the center around which the Kent family revolved. Temperance recovered fully from the difficult birth, though Dr. Morrison warned that future pregnancies might pose similar risks. This knowledge cast a shadow over their joy for a time, until Isaac assured her that one perfect child was more than enough blessing for any man. "Besides," he added with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, "if we decide our family needs to grow, there are always children who need homes." The orphan train comes through Carson City twice a year. His openness to adoption touched Temperance deeply, reminding her yet again of the generous spirit that had first drawn her to him. The spring of 1878 brought unprecedented success to their various enterprises. The apple orchard produced its first full harvest, with fruit so sweet and crisp that customers willingly paid premium prices. Isaac had cleverly marketed them as desert apples, turning their unusual growing location into a selling point rather than a liability. The bakery and cafe continued to flourish as well, with Temperance gradually returning to more active involvement as Thomas grew. They had converted a small room behind the kitchen into a nursery where the baby could nap while his mother worked, though he spent at least as much time being doted on by customers and staff. "He'll be spoiled rotten," Isaac observed good-naturedly, watching elderly Mrs. Patterson coo over Thomas one afternoon. "Between you, me, and half the town," Temperance leaned against her husband's shoulder, contentment washing over her. "He'll be loved. There are worse fates." As summer approached, they made the decision to spend more time at Apple Bow. The cabin had been enlarged and improved over the past year, with a proper nursery added for Thomas and modern conveniences that made it a true home rather than just a caretaker's dwelling. "Are you sure about this?" Temperance asked as they packed the wagon for their first extended stay. "The store Rufus can manage," Isaac interrupted confidently. "He's proven himself capable, and Martha has the bakery well in hand. Besides, it's only 3 miles. We can be back in town within the hour if needed." The truth was, both of them longed for the relative peace of the orchard. Town life had its advantages, but the constant social obligations and business demands left little time for simply being a family. Their first week at Apple Bow established a pleasant routine. Mornings were spent with Isaac tending the trees while Temperance cared for Thomas and prepared meals. Afternoons often found them working together on various projects, expanding the vegetable garden, preserving early fruits, planning new varieties to plant the following season. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset with Thomas cradled between them. Sometimes they spoke of the future, of their hopes and dreams for their son and their business. Other times they simply sat in comfortable silence, content in each other's company. It was during one such evening that Isaac broached a subject that had been on his mind for some time. "I've been thinking about expanding," he said, rocking slowly in the porch swing. Temperance raised an eyebrow. "The orchard?" "No, our holdings. Landry's planning to sell his property that borders our western edge. It's good land with access to the creek." "What would you use it for?" Isaac's eyes took on the distant look they always did when he was envisioning possibilities. "More orchard eventually, but I was thinking we might try some different crops first. Maybe peaches, plums, even some grapevines along the south-facing slope." Temperance considered this. "That would be quite an undertaking." "It would," he acknowledged, "but I'm thinking long-term, for Thomas and—" he hesitated, "and for any other children who might join our family someday." The subject of expanding their family had remained largely unspoken since Thomas's difficult birth. Hearing Isaac mention it now made Temperance's heart quicken. "You still think about that? More children?" Isaac shifted Thomas to his other arm, his expression thoughtful. "I think about the future, about leaving something meaningful behind, not just property or money, but a legacy of goodness, I suppose, a family that stands for something." The simple sincerity of his words moved Temperance deeply. This was the essence of the man she'd married, someone who saw beyond immediate profit to the lasting impact of his choices. "Then we should buy Landry's property," she said decisively, "and start planting those peach trees." Isaac's answering smile was like sunrise breaking across his face. He reached for her hand, squeezing it in silent gratitude for her understanding and support. As summer progressed into autumn, the Kents fell into a rhythm of dividing their time between town and orchard. 3 days each week were spent at the store and bakery, with the remainder at Apple Bow. This arrangement allowed them to maintain their business interests while still enjoying the quieter pace of rural life. Thomas continued to grow and thrive, developing into a cheerful baby who charmed everyone he met. By his 9th month, he was crawling everywhere with alarming speed, necessitating constant vigilance from both parents. "He's going to be walking before his first birthday," Isaac predicted proudly as they watched their son pull himself up using a chair. "Strong legs, just like his mother." Temperance scoffed at the compliment, but couldn't deny the pride she felt watching Thomas's determined efforts. Everything about him was a wonder to her, from his first toothy smile to the way he reached for her with absolute trust. Motherhood had transformed her in ways she hadn't anticipated, deepening her capacity for love while simultaneously making her feel more vulnerable than she'd ever been. The acquisition of Landry's property proceeded smoothly, adding another 20 acres to their holdings. Isaac immediately began preparations for spring planting. consulting with a horticulturist from California about which stone fruit varieties might best tolerate the Nevada climate. Their expanding enterprises necessitated hiring additional help. Isaac brought on a young man named Caleb Reynolds to assist with the orchard, while Temperance added another assistant at the bakery, a widow named Eleanor Simmons, who had a particular talent for decorative icing. "We're becoming proper employers," Temperance remarked one evening as they reviewed the week's payroll. "When did that happen?" Isaac chuckled. "Somewhere between you collapsing in the street and us buying half the valley, I suspect." She swatted his arm playfully. "Don't exaggerate." "It's hardly half the valley." "Not yet," he said with a wink. "Give me time." Thomas's first birthday was celebrated with a gathering that seemed to include half the population of Pahrump. The bakery closed early for the occasion, with tables set up in the street and lanterns strung overhead. Temperance had outdone herself with the cake 3 tiers decorated with spun sugar and topped with a miniature apple tree fashioned from icing. As they watched their son, smeared with cake and delightedly grabbing at the colorful paper decorations, Isaac slipped his arm around Temperance's waist. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked quietly. "When you first came to Pahrump," Temperance leaned into his embrace, remembering the desperate, hungry woman she'd been less than 2 years earlier. "Never. I was just trying to survive another day. And now." She looked around at the thriving businesses they'd built, the friends they'd made, their beautiful son, and finally up at Isaac, the man who had seen something worth saving in a starving thief. "Now I'm not just surviving," she said softly. "I'm living, fully, completely living." Isaac's answer was to pull her closer, planting a kiss on her temple that held the promise of all their tomorrows. As winter settled over Pahrump once again, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional light snow to the valley, the Kent family continued to prosper. The general store expanded its inventory to include more luxury items requested by the town's growing population, while the bakery added evening hours 3 days a week, serving simple suppers to travelers and townspeople alike. Thomas took his first unaided steps 2 weeks after his birthday, toddling from Isaac to Temperance with a look of triumphant determination that had both parents applauding his courage. Once mobile, he became increasingly curious about everything around him, requiring constant supervision. "He has your adventurous spirit," Isaac commented after retrieving their son from behind the flour barrels for the 3rd time in one morning. Temperance raised an eyebrow. "I believe it was you who left Pennsylvania to plant apple trees in the desert." "If anyone passed on a spirit of adventure, it wasn't me." Isaac laughed, conceding the point. "Perhaps it's simply the Kent orchard air makes one believe anything is possible." As spring approached, bringing with it plans for new plantings and expansions, Temperance began experiencing familiar symptoms: morning queasiness, inexplicable fatigue, sensitivity to certain foods. For weeks, she kept her suspicions to herself, partly from caution and partly from fear of the risks another pregnancy might entail. Finally, after consulting privately with Dr. Morrison, she knew she could delay no longer. On a mild evening in early March, with Thomas already asleep in his crib, she joined Isaac on the porch of Apple Bough. "I have something to tell you," she said, unable to keep a slight tremor from her voice. Isaac looked up from the agricultural catalog he'd been perusing, immediately alert to her tone. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "Not wrong exactly," she hedged, twisting her hands in her apron. "But perhaps concerning." He set aside the catalog, giving her his full attention. "Tell me." Taking a deep breath, Temperance met his gaze directly. "I'm with child again. About 2 months along, Dr. Morrison thinks." Isaac's expression cycled rapidly through surprise, joy, and finally, worry. "The risks are considerable," she acknowledged. "But the doctor believes with proper care and rest, there's every reason to hope for a safer delivery this time. He says my health is excellent, much better than when I was carrying Thomas." Isaac rose from his chair and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Are you afraid?" The simple question, asked with such gentleness, broke through Temperance's carefully maintained composure. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, but I'm happy too. Is that strange?" "No, my love," Isaac assured her, reaching up to cup her cheek. "It's perfectly natural." "I'm terrified and overjoyed myself. You're not upset that I didn't take more precautions." His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "How could I be upset about a new life created from our love? Whatever comes, we'll face it together just as we have everything else." As the weeks passed, Isaac became increasingly protective of Temperance, insisting she reduce her work at the bakery and hiring additional help for the household. Though she protested at first, the memory of Thomas's difficult birth eventually persuaded her to accept the extra care. They decided to spend most of the pregnancy at Apple Bow, where Temperance could rest more easily away from the constant demands of town life. Isaac arranged for a telephone line to be installed, one of the first in Pahrump, ensuring they could be quickly reached if issues arose at either business. By June, Temperance's condition was obvious to everyone. Unlike her first pregnancy, which had left her pale and frequently ill, this time she bloomed with health. Her skin glowed, her eyes sparkled, and her energy remained surprisingly steady, though she tired more quickly than before. "You're carrying differently this time," Mrs. Abernathy observed during one of her regular visits to check on Temperance. "Lower and more forward. Old wives would say that means a girl." Though they claimed not to put stock in such superstitions, both Isaac and Temperance secretly began thinking of the baby as she, imagining a daughter with Temperance's dark hair and determined spirit. Thomas, now an active toddler of 18 months, seemed fascinated by his mother's changing shape. He would often pat her rounded belly gently, breaking into delighted giggles when he felt movement in response. "Mama," he would say, one of his few clear words. "Baby." "That's right, my love," Temperance would answer, running her fingers through his sandy curls. "Your little brother or sister is growing in there." As summer's heat intensified, making Temperance increasingly uncomfortable, Isaac surprised her by bringing home a peculiar contraption, an ice box with a system of fans that circulated cooler air when cranked. "Where on earth did you find such a thing?" she exclaimed as he installed it in their bedroom. "Had it shipped from San Francisco," he admitted. "Cost a small fortune, but worth every penny if it helps you sleep better." Such thoughtfulness was typical of Isaac, whose devotion during her pregnancy touched Temperance deeply. He would rub her swollen feet each evening, read aloud from her favorite books when her eyes were too tired for reading, and wake without complaint when her discomfort disturbed their sleep. The baby was due in early October, but as September waned with no signs of impending labor, Dr. Morrison began visiting more frequently, concerned about the potential complications of a late birth. "The child is large," he warned after examining Temperance. "If labor doesn't begin naturally within the week, we may need to consider other options." Anxiety gnawed at both expectant parents, memories of Thomas's traumatic arrival still vivid in their minds. Isaac took to praying each night, something Temperance had rarely seen him do, kneeling beside their bed with his head bowed and his lips moving silently. When labor finally began on October 4th, it progressed with unexpected swiftness. Isaac had just enough time to send Caleb racing for Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Abernathy before Temperance's waters broke. "This is happening faster than before," she gasped between contractions that were already coming alarmingly close together. Isaac tried to maintain a calm facade, though panic threatened to overwhelm him. "That's good, isn't it? Less time means less strain on you." Before the doctor could arrive, it became apparent that the baby wouldn't wait. Mrs. Abernathy arrived just in time to take charge, rolling up her sleeves and issuing brisk instructions that left no room for argument. "This little one is in a hurry to meet the world," she declared after a quick examination. "Mr. Kent, boil water and bring clean towels, lots of them." Unlike Thomas's birth, where Isaac had been an anxious observer, this time he became an active participant, supporting Temperance's back, wiping her brow, offering encouragement with each push. When their daughter finally emerged with a lusty cry, it was Isaac who caught her in his trembling hands, guided by Mrs. Abernathy's calm instructions. "A perfect little girl," the midwife confirmed, helping Isaac place the squalling infant on Temperance's chest. And in record time, barely 3 hours from start to finish. Dr. Morrison arrived minutes later, looking somewhat chagrined to have missed the delivery. After examining both mother and child, he pronounced them in excellent health, with none of the complications that had marked Thomas's birth. She's beautiful, Isaac whispered, gazing down at their daughter's tiny face, already showing signs of Temperance's delicate features. Like her mother. What shall we name her? Temperance asked, her voice hoarse from exertion but filled with joy. They had discussed several possibilities over the past months, but hadn't settled on a final choice. Now, looking at the dark-haired infant nestled against Temperance's breast, Isaac knew with certainty. Hope, he said softly. Hope Amelia Kent. Temperance's eyes filled with tears as she recognized his intention to honor both the hope that had sustained them through difficult times and the memory of her mother, Amelia. It's perfect, she agreed, stroking the baby's downy head. Welcome to the world, Hope. As evening settled over the orchard, bringing with it the first cool whispers of autumn, the Kent family gathered in peaceful contentment. Thomas had been brought in to meet his sister, regarding the small bundle with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty before pronouncing her pretty baby and bestowing a gentle pat on her head. Later, with both children sleeping soundly, Thomas in his crib and Hope in a bassinet beside their bed, Isaac and Temperance found themselves alone for the first time since the birth. I never imagined such happiness was possible, Isaac confessed, holding Temperance close as they lay together. When I came west, I thought I was simply seeking a place to build a life. I never realized I was searching for you. Temperance pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent that had come to mean safety and love. And I thought I'd lost everything when I came to Pahrump. Instead, I found everything I never knew I wanted. As they drifted toward sleep, wrapped in each other's arms with their children nearby, both reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate act of theft to the abundance that now surrounded them, a thriving business, a productive orchard, two beautiful children, and most precious of all, a love that had transformed both their lives. Outside their window, the apple trees stood sentinel in the moonlight, their branches heavy with ripening fruit, a fitting symbol of the sweet harvest their lives had yielded. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Kent family. As Pahrump grew from a small settlement into a proper town, their businesses expanded accordingly. The general store doubled in size, adding a hardware section and postal services. The bakery and cafe became a social hub, with Temperance introducing afternoon tea services that quickly became popular among the ladies of the community. Thomas and Hope grew into spirited, intelligent children who complemented each other perfectly. Thomas inherited his father's practical nature and quiet determination, while Hope displayed Temperance's quick wit and artistic sensibilities. Despite their differences, the siblings shared an unshakable bond, with Thomas appointing himself his sister's fierce protector from an early age. In 1881, the Kents welcomed their third child, a son they named James, who arrived with such surprising ease that Temperance barely had time to call for the midwife. With his shock of dark hair and serious expression, little James seemed a perfect blend of both parents from the start. By the time James was born, Apple Bough had become the family's permanent residence. The orchard had expanded to include not just apples but peaches, pears, and cherries as well. Isaac's experimental vineyard was beginning to produce enough grapes for small batch wine production, a venture that promised to be even more profitable than the fruit sales. With their growing family and expanding enterprises, Isaac and Temperance found themselves needing more help than ever before. They built several small cottages on their property for workers, creating something of a community around the orchard. Caleb Reynolds remained their most trusted employee, eventually becoming manager of the agricultural operations when Isaac needed to focus more on the commercial side of their businesses. Through all the changes and growth, Temperance never forgot the desperate circumstances that had first brought her to Pahrump. Each week, she set aside a portion of the bakery's production for those in need, instituting what became known as Friday bread, where anyone could come for a free loaf, no questions asked. Similarly, Isaac ensured that any bruised or imperfect fruit from the orchard was distributed to poorer families rather than being discarded. "We've been blessed beyond measure," Temperance explained when new residents questioned their generosity. "It would be wrong not to share those blessings." This philosophy extended to their children as well, who were raised to understand both privilege and responsibility. From an early age, Thomas, Hope, and James were taught to contribute to the family enterprises in age-appropriate ways, collecting eggs from the henhouse, helping with simple baking tasks, or sorting fruit during harvest time. "Work builds character," Isaac would tell them, echoing the principles by which he himself had been raised, "and gives purpose to privilege." As the children grew older, education became a priority. Though Pahrump now boasted a respectable schoolhouse, Isaac and Temperance wanted more for their children than the basic curriculum it offered. They hired a tutor, Miss Eleanor Harlow, a well-educated woman from Boston who had come west for health reasons. Under her guidance, the Kent children received instruction in literature, mathematics, science, and languages that rivaled what they might have obtained in Eastern schools. By 1890, as Temperance approached her 40th year and Isaac his 45th, their lives had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Thomas, now 12, showed a keen interest in the business side of their enterprises, often accompanying his father to meetings with suppliers and customers. Hope, at 10, displayed remarkable talent for drawing and painting, filling sketchbooks with detailed renderings of the orchard and its surroundings. 8-year-old James, quieter than his siblings but no less bright, had developed a fascination with the natural world, collecting specimens of plants and insects that he cataloged with scientific precision. The orchard had become one of the most successful agricultural ventures in southern Nevada, with Kent's desert fruits recognized throughout the region for their exceptional quality. The original apple tree the first Isaac had planted still stood at the center of it all, now gnarled and spreading but still producing fruit each year. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the expanded porch of Applebough watching the children play an elaborate game of their own invention on the lawn, Isaac reached for Temperance's hand. "Do you ever think about that day," he asked, "when Collins caught you with the apple?" Temperance smiled, the memory long since transformed from one of shame to one of gratitude. "Often, how could I not? It changed everything." Isaac's thumb traced the gold band on her finger, worn smooth by 14 years of marriage. "I've never told you this, but I saw you earlier that day. Walking down the street, looking so lost and determined all at once. Something about you caught my attention even then." "Truly?" Temperance asked, surprised by this revelation. "You never mentioned it." "I didn't want you to think I'd been watching you like some sort of peculiar stalker," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "But when Collins started shouting, I recognized you immediately, knew I had to intervene." "My gallant rescuer," Temperance teased gently, though her eyes were soft with genuine emotion. "Saving the desperate thief. Best decision I ever made," Isaac said, his gaze traveling from their playing children to the flourishing orchard beyond. "Look what grew from that one moment." As the sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and gold, reflecting off the ripening fruit that surrounded their home, Temperance leaned her head against her husband's shoulder in silent agreement. From the desperation of hunger to this abundance of love and plenty, it was more than a journey. It was a transformation. The stolen apple that had brought them together had yielded seeds of a different sort, seeds of family, community, purpose, and enduring love. In the fertile soil of their shared vision and complementary strengths, those seeds had grown into a life neither could have imagined alone. "An apple for your thoughts," Isaac murmured, producing a perfect specimen from his pocket, one of the first ripe fruits of this season's harvest. Temperance accepted it with a smile that still, after all these years, made his heart quicken. Taking a bite, she savored the sweet, tart flavor before offering the apple back to him. As Isaac bit into the same apple, their gazes held in silent understanding of all they had built together. Not just an orchard, a store, or a bakery, but a legacy of love that would continue to bear fruit long after the last apple was harvested. In the fading light, with their children's laughter floating on the evening breeze, Temperance silently blessed the desperate hunger that had led her to steal that first apple and the extraordinary man who had responded not with punishment, but with the gift of his orchard, his name, and his heart.